welcome to Scholars Hub at Home. I'm Rose Lucibello, Manager of Advancement Events. Thank you for joining us today for today's session titled Feminism for Mothers. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I am on. Because we may not be gathered in the same place, the land I'm about to acknowledge might not be for the territory you are on. Please take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory that you are on. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Now, we would like to take a quick poll before the session begins, and the question is, how would you rate your knowledge regarding the topic of today's presentation? The poll should pop up on your screen right now, and I'll give everyone a moment to respond. Great, thank you. This helps our speakers learn more about our audience. If you need help with the Zoom webinar, feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and enter your question. Our team is here to help you. That same button may be used to submit questions for our guest speaker to answer during the Q&A period. You may enter questions at any time during the presentation. Please note that all of your questions and comments are visible to the panelists and staff working behind the scenes, so we ask that you please keep your comments relevant and respectful. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Andrea O'Reilly. Dr. Andrea O'Reilly is internationally recognized as the founder of motherhood studies and its subfield maternal theory. She is a full professor in the School of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies at York, founder and editor-in-chief of the Journal of the Motherhood Initiative, and publisher of Demeter Press. Most recently, in 2024, she published the co-edited collections, Careful Relationships Between Mothers and the Caregivers They Hire, The Mother Wave, Theorizing, Enacting, and Representing Mother-centric Feminism, The Missing Mother, and in 2025, Gone Feral, Unruly and the Undoing of Normative Femininity. Dr. O'Reilly is twice the recipient of York University's Professor of the Year Award for Teaching Excellence, and is the 2019 recipient of the Status of Women in Equity Award of Distinction from OCUFA. Welcome, Dr. O'Reilly. I will be back after your presentation for our Q&A.
Thank you so much for those words of introduction, and thank you for having me. I'm honored and delighted to be here. So I will begin, and I look forward to our discussions following my talk. So here we go. Mother-centric feminism begins with the conviction that mothering matters, and it is central to the lives of those who identify as mothers. In saying this, I'm not suggesting that mothering is all that matters or that it matters the most. Rather, any understanding of mothers' lives is incomplete without considering how becoming and being a mother shapes that mother's sense of self and how they see and live in the world. When I use the term mothers, I refer to individuals who engage in mother work, or as Sarah Ruddick has theorized, maternal practice. Such a term is not limited to biological mothers or cisgender women, but to anyone who does the work of mothering as a central part of their life. For individuals who are mothers, mothering is a significant, if not defining dimension of their lives, and arguably maternity matters more than gender. Matricentric feminism seeks to make motherhood the business of feminism by positioning mothers' needs and concerns as the starting point for a theory and politic on and for the empowerment of mothers and women. Now, this repositioning is not to suggest that matter-centric feminism should replace traditional feminist thought. Rather, it is to emphasize that the category of mother is distinct from the category of women, and that many of the problems mothers face, whether they be social, economic, political, cultural, psychological, and so forth, are specific to mothers' roles and identities as mothers. As scholar Patrice de Quencio emphasizes, to the extent that mothering in all of its diverse forms remains an important aspect of women's lives, and the decisions about whether, when, and how to mother continue to face almost all women, feminism cannot claim to give an adequate account of women's lives and to represent women's needs and interests if it ignores the issues of mothering. Sorry, I have a cat I'm going to move. My apologies. Indeed, to the extent that mothering in all of its diverse forms remains an important aspect of women's lives, and the decisions about whether and when to mother continue to face almost all women, again, feminism cannot represent women if it does not include mothering. Indeed, as philosopher Kitty emphasizes, most women care for their dependents, some dependents at some point. Sorry, I have a cat problem. I will remove my scarf. Apologies for that. Most women care for their dependents at some point, and for many women, this occupies the better point of their lives. However, as African American Herler notes in her 84% of women between 40 and 49 in the United States have had at least one biological children. However, as she continues, the experience of mothering has not received proportionate scholarly attention. More specifically, as UK writer Lucy Jones notes in her recent book, motherhood is a major female experience where feminism has failed. Indeed, as I argue in my book on matter-centric feminism, motherhood, I emphasize, is the unfinished business of feminism. Mothers are impressed as women, and they are oppressed as mothers. Consequently, mothers need a matter-centric feminism, a mode of feminism organized around and for their particular identity and work as mothers. Thus, matter-centric feminism is needed because mothers, arguably more so than women in general, remain disempowered despite 60 years of feminism. Now, in my recent collection, The Mother Wave, Theorizing, Acting, and Representing Matter-Centric Feminism, we describe matter-centric feminism as the mother wave. We are aware that the term mother wave, the wave, attracts criticism by some for, among other reasons, being selected and identified by the media, being dismissive of the multiplicity and differences among feminisms and feminists, focusing on particular interests and group of feminists, and for pushing and celebrating specific feminism as icons of the movement. Yet, we choose the concept because the waves of feminism do not represent nor reflect the entire history of feminism, but rather are ascribed to moments that seem particularly inflamed and intense. We believe that the surging and forcefulness connotated by this wave metaphor speaks to periods of intensity, prompting increased action within feminism. We understand, rather than conflating the wave with a particular generation or attributing it to progress, surges are formulated through a range of interdependency. The wave is a moment in which discourse, effect, context, and affect all converge, creating an evolving, energized period of concerted activism. By moving away from diverse perspectives of the wave narrative and rejecting waves as connotating general difference, we come to understand that waves are not predictable, uniform, or monolithic, but rather are capable of diversity and multiplicity. Oceanic waves do not begin from a definitive starting point or have an endpoint. Rather, each wave is connected to the entire ocean. Waves carry energy, form the environment around them, such as the energy caused by earthquakes or volcanic eruptions, landslides, or the wind. Oceans are full of cross currents and surges of water. They carry forces of energy and forms of waves from one moment to another, drawing energy to sustain their movement until the wave breaks. We believe it is possible to review both the linearity and generational limitations of the waves of feminism because chronological order does not preclude a crossing of temporalities. Understanding feminist waves as part of a larger body recognizes that they emerge from within a considerable broader body of historical and feminist work, and that they are in stronger conversations with one another rather than a linear interpretation. Furthermore, feminist ways can encourage and support internal, personal, and feminist dialogue central to engaging with disagreements among feminists and to make visible and work with those marginalized. Matricentric feminism, I believe, is the mother wave of the feminist ocean. Like a wave that rises to minimally swell or break through the calm body of water, matricentric feminism brings to the surface the undercurrents of feminism, mothering and motherhood, which have gone unnoticed. And like a wave, matricentric feminism forcefully arcs from normative motherhood and feminist practices and smashes through patriarchal beliefs about mothering and feminism. Rather than separating itself from other feminism, as has practiced by some previous feminist ways, the mother wave of matricentric feminism invites conversations with others and offers a practice of feminism that aims to coexist, overlap, and intersect with others. Now, I use the term matricentric to define and describe a mother-centered mode of feminism. Feminist literary critic Elaine Showalter uses the term gynocentric to signify woman-centered perspective. Similarly, I use the term matricentric to convey a mother-centered perspective. When discussing matricentric feminism, I draw on the concept of a matrifocal narrative, particularly as it has been developed in maternal literary theory. Introduction to the book Mother-Daughter Plot, Marion Hirsch asks this: why is Sophocles in Oedipus Rex? Why in Oedipus Rex rather is the voice of Jocasta, the mother, missing? She connects this narrative to a larger literary absence. And in asking, she says, where the story of Jocasta is in the story of Oedipus, I'm also asking not only where the stories of women are in men's plots, but where are the stories of the mothers in the plots of sons and daughters? She concludes thus: clearly, to know Jocasta's maternal story, we have to begin with the mother. Drawing on Hirsch's work, two other literary theorists, Daly and Reddy, emphasize that even in the limited number of fictional theoretical texts that do begin with the mother in her own right from her perspective, they seldom hold fast to maternal perspective. Further, when texts do maintain this perspective, readers and critics tend to suppress the centrality of mothering when they read those texts. Daly and Ruddy have coined the term daughter centricity to describe this perspective, in which less is learned about what it is like to be a mother and more about what it's like to be mothered, even when the author has both experiences. Now, within the last 3 decades, as motherhood studies has emerged as a distinct and established academic discipline, this daughter centricity has been countered and corrected in fiction and in theory. Indeed, a central aim of motherhood studies is to articulate and theorize the voice of the mother. That is, to analyze becoming and being a mother from the perspective and subjectivity of mothers themselves. As Adrienne Rich concludes her brilliant A Woman Born, she says in these powerful words: the words are being spoken now and are being written down. The taboos are being broken. The masks of motherhood are cracking through. Whether such unmasking, to use theorist Moshart's term, is conveyed through a sociological study of mothers in popular culture, or whether it's in fiction, feminist writers and scholars endeavor to unmask motherhood by documenting the lived reality of mothering. In so doing, they counter this daughter centricity to create and compose what I have called a matrifocal narrative. Drawing from the sociologist Miriam Johnson's discussion of matrifocality, she argues this: matrifocal societies tend to have greater gender equality because the power of the maternal. In these societies, regardless of the type of kinship system, women play roles of cultural and social significance and define themselves less as wives than as mothers. However, Johnson emphasizes that matrifocality does not refer necessarily to domestic maternal dominance as much as it does to the relative cultural prestige of the mother and her role, and that this role in these societies is valued and elaborated. Moreover, in these matrifocal societies, mothers are central and have a great deal of status, and they have control over the economic resources of their kinship, and they are involved in all kin-making decision. It is not the absence of males, Johnson emphasizes. Males may be quite present, but the centrality of women as mothers that make a society matrifocal. So I end that with Johnson's key insights to the importance of matrifocality. And in my work, a matrifocal narrative, borrowing from Johnson's terminology, is one in which a mother plays a role of cultural and social significance, and in which motherhood is thematically elaborated and valued, and is structurally central to that research. In other words, and again to draw on the works of Daly and Reddy, matrifocal narratives begin with the mother in her own right, and they hold fast to maternal perspective. In addition, a matrifocal reading attends to and accentuates the maternal in any research, whether it be sociological, political, historical, literary, or so forth. As matricentric feminism is matrifocal in focus, it's multi and interdisciplinary in perspective. Matricentric feminism draws from many academic disciplines, including anthropology, history, literary society studies, sociology, philosophy, psychology, sexuality studies, and women's studies, as well from the established schools of academic feminism. Indeed, far from being an island of its own, matricentric feminism is informed by traditional schools of academic feminism and its most prominent theorists. For example, it draws upon womanist and African American feminism. Matricentric feminism draws upon liberal feminism. It draws upon psychoanalytic feminism, queer lesbian feminism, difference feminist, socialist feminism, third wave feminism, to just name a few. For example, matricentric feminism is formed by the African American feminist commitment to the importance of lived experience, while also being informed by the third wave feminist commitment to intersectional analysis. Now, I'm frequently asked what matricentric feminism is. As a new and emergent feminism, it is difficult to specifically define matricentric feminism other than to say it is explicitly matrifocal in its perspective and emphasis. It begins with the mother and takes seriously the work of mothering, and it is multi and interdisciplinary in perspective. Now here I gesture towards some of its governing and central principles and aims of this matricentric feminism, and they are: it asserts that the topics of mothers, mothering, and motherhood are deserving of serious and sustained scholarly inquiry, regards mothering as work that is important and valuable to society, and emphasizes that the essential task of mothering is not and should not be the sole responsibility of, or duty of mothers. Matricentric feminism contests, it challenges, and it counters the patriarchal oppressive institution of motherhood and seeks to imagine and implement a maternal identity and practice that is empowering to mothers. It seeks to correct the child-centeredness that defines much of the scholarship and activism of motherhood, and seeks to develop research and activism from the experience and the perspectives of motherhood. Matricentric feminism commits to social change and social justice and regards mothering as a socially engaged enterprise and a site of power, wherein mothers can and do create social change through child rearing and activism. Matricentric feminism understands that mothering and motherhood to be culturally determined and variable, and it is committed to exploring the diversity of maternal experience across race, class, gender, culture, ethnicity, sexuality, ability, and geographical location. And finally, matricentric feminism endeavors to establish maternal theory and motherhood studies as an autonomous, independent, and legitimate scholarly discipline. Now, this above list is only partial and provisional. Since the publication of the first edition of my book on matricentric feminism in 2016, numerous scholars and writers and activists across diverse perspectives and disciplines have taken up matricentric feminism to explore topics as varied as literature, film, art, photography, public policy, politics, incarceration, critical disability, health, violence against women, and activism, to name but a few. 2 journal issues have been published on the topic of matricentric feminism. The Australian journal Hecate did so in 2019, and the Journal of Motherhood Initiative did so in 2019. Indeed, a Google search of the term matricentric feminism now reveals 11,000 entries. This scholarship recognizes the need for a distinct feminism for and about mothers, and it explores mothers' particularly needs, experience, and desires, which continue to be marginalized as compared to non-mothers. It is my hope that this work on matter-centered feminism, even as it is emerging, will impart and deliver new understandings and uses of a feminism in which, to borrow from Marilyn Waring's words, a perspective in which mothers and mothering count. Now, just briefly to conclude, Rafia Zuraki concludes her recent brilliant book, Against White Feminism, saying, I see too many women of color turning away from feminism. In some cases, they are saying goodbye to mainstream feminism, mainstream white feminism, in order to build more specialized movements, such as Muslim feminism, Black feminism, and queer feminism. She goes on to say, these smaller groups have a powerful role to play, but we also need to create a space where different tribes can work together on issues that affect all of us, and vitally, where they can lend one another support for issues that do not affect all of us. Communities must remain free to have their own specialized group, but they need not reduce their capacity for coming together to create transformative mainstream feminist politics. Building on her argument, I suggest that many mothers have likewise turned away from mainstream feminism to build their own movement of matter-centric feminism. And with her, I also argue that while specialized feminisms like matter-centric feminisms are certainly necessary, we also need to create a space where we can work together to create a truly inclusive feminist politic. Indeed, as one theorist, Kawash, emphasizes, feminist theorists, scholars, and writers, as well as feminist mother activists, have a lot to say to each other and a lot to learn from each other about motherhood. Motherhood studies needs the perspective and commitments of feminism, as well as their institutional resources. At the same time, and I think this is it's important here, feminism cannot possibly hope to remain relevant without acknowledging motherhood in all of its contradictions and complexities. Yet matter-centric feminism, I argue, must be more than just acknowledge. It must be recognized as a legitimate, viable, and independent school of feminist thought, and it must be integrated into mainstream academic feminism. But how do we accomplish this? We need more women doing motherhood scholarship and more mother professors in academia. We must demand that matter-centric feminism has a chapter of its own, as do other schools of feminist thought, whether they be queer, global, third wave, and our feminist theory readers. That introduction to women and gender studies courses and textbooks include sections on motherhood. That women's journals and conferences include more papers on motherhood, and that more books on motherhood are reviewed in these journals. We must continuously challenge the conflation of mothering with motherhood within academic feminism. As well, we must counter the association of matter-centric feminism with gender essentialism. Decisively and urgently, we must interrupt the received narrative of academic feminism, in particular its normalization of the genderless and autonomous subject, to foreground the centrality of the reproductive identity of lives of mothers and the importance of care in our larger society. Indeed, as journalist Anne-Marie Slaughter comments, the bottom line is that we are never going to get gender equality between women and men unless we value the work of care as much as we value paid work. That's the unfinished business. Finally, and most importantly, we must demand that matter-centric feminists be recognized and respected as the feminists that they are, and that their feminism, that of matter-centric feminism, have a room of its own in the larger home of academic feminism. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for this timely talk. As we all know, it was Mother's Day just a few days ago, and so definitely an excellent timing.
And apologies for my cat attack during my talk.
No worries. It was a nice, it's new. There's always something new to offer
There's always a cat in a video, yes.
And we now, for our audience, do have some time for questions, and we're asking that you please submit your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And I will kick off by asking you, what are the aims and challenges of this matter-centric feminism?
That is the question that is always asked. And not hard to answer, but a complex one to answer. I think a matricentric feminism just begins with the question, what does this mean for mothers? So let's say, you're writing I don't know, a paper, a research project on health. We're going to change the health of a particular at a particular hospital or in a particular policy statement. That just as we used to say, well, what does this mean for women? And that's how we did for feminism. We now must ask, what does this mean for mothers? So, what does it mean if we develop public policy? What if government policy and ask, well, what does this mean for mothers? What if we develop workplace practices and begin with the question, what do mothers need? How would they envision the ideal workplace policy and practice? Even in the way we design our homes. I think if you ask mothers, we design our homes very differently than we design them now. I think we would have different workplace practices. We certainly would have different health practices. So it's about, seeing and developing policy practices, or whether it's research, or, sociological research, by seeing those questions through the lens of a mother's life and identity. Now, I'm not saying that's the only thing that matters, but I think mothers' needs have been woefully ignored and underrepresented in the policy that cultures and societies around the world develop. And the most glaring example, of course, was the recent COVID pandemic. We had all kinds of policies and practices and discussions about paid work, but there was no CERB for care work. Few people are asking, how can we better support women as they do the care work in a home during the long years of that, horrible pandemic. So that's what we need. The challenge is to convince that mothers matter and that mothers, that their needs and concerns must be part of any policy discussion or any research proposal or any discussion or reflection on our workplaces. So it's putting a mother's gaze in our discussions where it before has been ignored or completely marginalized.
A question that I had actually during your talk is, how does matricentric feminism differentiate itself from other branches of feminism? Because it's so interesting to think of kind of the same similar goals, but how would you say it differentiates itself?
That's an important question. And at no point am I suggesting that, we do away with, mainstream feminisms, whether that be liberal or third wave or, queer or global. Those feminisms need to continue. But just as, we needed African American feminism to address the specific needs of Black women. I mean, Black women rightly said in the 60s and 70s, your feminism, women, your white feminism is not meeting my needs. You're not representing what I need as a Black woman. I would say the same thing happens here. Mothers are saying, we like what you're doing, feminist. You're doing good work here, but you're not really fully representing my needs as a mother. Just as a Black woman once said, and are still saying, you're not representing my needs as a Black woman. So I think we need an intersectional analysis, and we must recognize that women, mothers are not just women, they're also mothers. Just as we recognize that Black women are not just women, they're also Black women. And so that intersectional analysis means that we need to see women as mothers as well as we see them as women. And I'm not sure that answers that, but it's emphasizing that mothers are different from women and therefore have different needs, concerns, and also different challenges, but also arguably different possibilities through their identity and work as mothers.
Well, very interesting. And of course, because mothers can be employees and CEOs and all kinds of
Yeah.
other things at the same time. So that is wonderful. So we have some questions from the audience here. So I'm going to speak from Freshta. And she says, wants to acknowledge that you were so well spoken, acknowledging your talk, Dr. O'Reilly, and thank you for your wisdom. And now, if you could dream of the future of motherhood studies, do you think you can envision it as not only the space for the tribes of feminism to intersect, but that matricentric feminists are advisors in public policy spaces as well? And she also wants to let you know she loves your cat.
Thank you. Thank you, Freshta. Freshta is actually a former student of mine.
Oh,
And
great.
I may say that that cat, my brother passed away and we adopted his two cats, and that cat is named Evil. And I think appropriately so, because he tends to attack me when I'm trying to do my work or give a talk. That's such a good question. I mean, I think we need, if I could imagine or dream a world, I mean, I just, wish that, policymakers, researchers, students, activists talk to mothers. I mean, it's not that revolutionary. What do mothers need? And I think if we just asked mothers and then, of course, listened, that I think, yes, all those policymakers, researchers, employers, CEOs, whatever they may be, ask what mothers need to do better in their lives, whether that's at their job, whether that's in their community, whether that's raising their children. So, in my ideal world, just as we wanted, um, men to take women's studies courses, and we still need that. We also need people to take motherhood studies courses because mothers are, as the stat I gave you, women, majority of women still become mothers. I'm not pronatalist. I'm not essentialist. I am, I do not, I want a world where women have the choice to be mothers and that choice is respected and supported. But the reality still remains that 80% of women between the ages of 40 and 49 are mothers and their needs are being ignored. They are not part of discussions. What do mothers need at any level of government, in any workplace, in any research policy? I'm overstating my case, but I think generally, it's an afterthought, if at all. What do mothers need? We kind of have to ask what women need now, because that's the law. We hope that doesn't always happen, but nobody or few people are asking, what do mothers need? How can I better support mothers in whatever space we may be in?
Oh,
Hope
interesting. And so
that answers that, Krista.
And Freshta did carry into a second question where she's saying, how do we structure motherhood studies to prepare matricentric feminists to become these advisors? Is it placing graduate studies in direct partnerships with stakeholders, partners? What would you advise on next steps then?
That's a great question. Yes, and in my ideal world, I would hope, that if you were working, let's say, in an agency where you're dealing with mothers, and I think that would be most agencies, right? Given that mothers, 80% of women do become mothers, and mothers, I think, access agencies more than non-mothers because of the lives they lead, having children, that I would just want and hope that, let's say you're doing a degree in social work and you're going to be out there actually dealing with mothers, and very marginalized, vulnerable mothers, that you would have taken a course in motherhood studies, that you would actually look at the history of motherhood, that you'd look at the sociology of motherhood, you'd look at the psychology of motherhood, that you would know mothers and what their needs are. And I think you'd be far better prepared to be a good social worker because your clientele are going to be mothers and you're going into that job knowing nothing about mothers' needs from the courses you've taken at university. So that would be my wish list, to make these courses mandatory in any program that its graduates will be dealing firsthand with a population of mothers.
Makes sense, definitely. Next, we have from Catherine in our audience, who is a mother and a PhD student, currently doing research on caregiving by musicians in the gig economy. She wants to let you know she really loved your presentation, found it very inspiring. And she's mentioning that she's the only mother in the cohort and she finds that she struggles to ask for accommodations based on parenting responsibilities. But obviously, her lifestyle is very different than that of her peers. So she'd like you to share your thoughts on how programs in schools can help to support mothers in the school better, to be able to see, more matricentric academic work in the literature.
You
Yeah.
mean schools, just to clarify, schools in terms of students studying this topic or schools in terms of supporting mothers or both?
I kind of read this maybe as both.
Okay, all right. That's a good question, Catherine, and thank you for it. Yeah, I mean it's difficult. It's difficult. It can be really sometimes very depressing. And what I mean by that is, I've done a lot of research and with previous grants where looking at, mothers in the academy, for example, I did a very large study where I interviewed like 60 plus mother academics. And what I found to be quite disturbing and alarming is that a lot of policies, so let's say there is a policy available, let's say, for 2 months maternity leave, or let's say, you can have your classes scheduled a particular time. I mean, very few universities did that. Let's be very clear. Very few universities had pro-mother policies. It was very depressing. But even the ones that did, a lot of mothers didn't take them up because they were fearful that, let's say, they were going up for tenure and they wanted to stop, they wanted to go on maternity leave, um, understandably. A lot of women, would cut short their maternity leave, or they would not ask for, certain provisions because they would worry, and I think rightly so, though legally, of course, it could not be used against them in Canada, but they were worried that it could down the road affect their chances. They may not be seen as committed to their job, as serious as the man, in the next cubicle who can put his career first, whether that means, working late at night, traveling for meetings or conferences, all those things that unencumbered employees can do. And the woman, they often say, and we've known this in feminism for decades. It's hard for women, but it's even harder for mothers to pretend they're unencumbered. So a lot of mothers will try to pass as non-mothers because they're rightfully fearful that that could be used against them. And they are right to be so paranoid because there's lots of evidence that that has happened. So how do you do it then? Well, the only way you can do it is by, capacity building, by, critical mass theory. If there are more people doing it, it becomes normalized, it becomes accepted, it becomes the default position. And unfortunately, when that happens, it's usually by fathers. So, when fathers say, I'm going to leave a meeting early because I have to take Johnny to soccer, everybody in the room says, oh, he's such a committed father. Look at him putting his children first. A woman asks the same to leave a meeting early for Sally's ballet class, let's say, she doesn't get the next promotion. Right? She's not really committed to her job. Look, she left that important meeting 20 minutes early. So I think, all of us need to do that, as fathers and as mothers and as caregivers. And that as human beings. So sometimes we have to leave a meeting because we may have an aging parent that needs to go to the doctor and so on. So many jobs don't want us to be human beings. They want us to be, disembodied, autonomous subjects who have no life outside the workplace. And I think the more we insist on our humanity, that we have to value care in our society. We need to make space for care in our workplaces. And the more we do that, all of us do that, the more it becomes normalized. And we see examples of that in Scandinavian countries where it's an embarrassment to be compared to them, right? It is just de facto in those countries. For example, in Nordic countries, you can work part-time for 8 years, I believe. You can work 4 days a week, and not be at all penalized, and then gradually go back to a 5-day model. Maternity leaves are, 18 months to 2 years. There's mandatory parental leave for fathers. There's flex time. There's lots of creative ways we can do this. And other societies have done it at no cost to their productivity, right? As a nation.
So interesting. Very, very, very interesting. Our next question is from Stephanie, who is your IVRT from Brazil. Just wants
Oh,
you to know it's good to see you again. And her question for you is, how can we encourage the exchange of female researchers and mothers in universities around the world?
yeah. Yeah, Stephanie was here in Canada from Brazil for 6 months last term, and took my maternal theory course. That's such a good question. And again, gosh, if we could do this more, we could do it so much better. That I think the conversation in motherhood studies needs to become more global, just like women's studies was so North American centered for so many decades. And now I think feminism can say it's kind of corrected that bias of it that it held, that feminism is now more global, and more intersectional. That is also the demand and challenge of motherhood studies. I think we're doing pretty well. I mean, I think motherhood studies, foregrounds race, sexuality, region, class, and race at the foreground of its analysis. But I think we need more dialogues across boundaries and borders. I think, we need to be talking to each other more because the meaning of matricentric feminism, I think, is quite different in Brazil than it would be in Norway. And what the needs are of mothers in Japan are going to be different than they are in Ireland. So we need to create spaces for that international dialogue. I just got back Monday night, very late, from a conference in Spain, where there was, dozens of researchers from many countries. And what a rich and rewarding, 3 days it was, because we are all committed to the empowerment of mothers, but also recognize that how to do that certainly will vary depending on where you are on the globe. So, yeah, I mean, I always fantasize about a really rich benefactor who will donate lots of monies to create an Institute of Motherhood Studies where we could bring scholars together and continue these conversations, into the future, right? The biggest challenge is we don't have those resources right now, to do those conferences, to do those fellowships, to publish those books. And that, of course, would go a long way if we had an endowment such as that. But until then, we were doing it, and we can continue to keep doing it, and we're doing it over Zoom, and we're doing it through conferences, and we're doing it through email to create that global community of matricentric feminists as best we can with the limited resources we have.
That's great. Another question from someone is she wants to know your opinion of the word matrescence in the gloss in terms of motherhood studies and how to approach this term in the ongoing study on maternal health and
Mhm.
postpartum struggle.
Yes, that's a great question. I'm actually writing a chapter on that right now. Matrescence is a term that was coined, 40, 50 years ago by an anthropologist. I believe her name was Reed. But it's now have quite a bit of currency now. So the term is sort of likened to adolescence. It's a particular period in women's life, matrescence, when women become mothers. And that is a hugely transformative time of our lives where, we are completely undone and reborn from woman to mother. And for many women, it is a really hard time, because in our society in the West, you're at a hospital in 8 hours. You're supposed to have your bikini body back, in 2 days. You're supposed to pretend, oh, I had a baby, but so on, and get on with your life and pretend it didn't happen. And in the United States, be back to work on day 4. Thankfully, we have better maternity leave here. So yes, there is a wealth of information now coming out on matrescence, that transformative period in women's lives that has been woefully under researched. And the recognition that it is a huge period of change and adjustment for women. I do the research and literature. I'm writing a book right now on becoming a mother and being a mother in contemporary novels and memoirs. And everyone I read, it's the same heartbreaking story again, how a woman becomes a mother and how undervalued she is, how isolated she is, how taken advantage she is, how exhausted she is, how guilty she feels, how her partner in the heterosexual narratives, how woefully uninvolved he is, and how she's drowning. In despair, exhaustion, self-doubt, and guilt. So we got to make it better for mothers and that moment. And a lot more needs to be done. But at least we're talking about it now in a way that 30 years, I don't think postpartum depression was even, and in most end discussions, even in the health sector. So thank you for bringing up matrescence. It is a really new and exciting field of research and motherhood studies.
And so relatable. I'm a mother of a 5-year-old, and it just is so very relatable. Everything you just said, for sure. And so I like this one. Tina says, Mother's Day often results in this public and private accolades for superhero moms. And in many ways, this is glorifying the individualization of mothering and glorifies mother exhaustion. So how can matricentric feminism, in your opinion, combat this practice?
Thank you, Tina, for that question. I really appreciate it. I think the first thing we need to do, of many, is to reclaim Mother's Day as a political day, right? And yeah, I'm all for, candies and chocolate and cake and flowers. But that's not what Mother's Day should be about. I mean, yes, of course, it's okay to, for a child to write Happy Mother's Day card in their classroom and send off to their mother. But I think we really need to use the day to think and to think hard and long about what mothers need, right? We need to reclaim the day as a political, social one, and not, as you say, an individualist one. We romanticize burnout. We romanticize individualism. We romanticize self-care. And so often the solution to mothers' burnout, exhaustion is not changes in public policy, which it should be, or having more gender equity in our homes, which must be. It's about self-care. So women, go get your nails done, have a long bath. I mean, that's all very well and good. We're talking about the need for structural change in our homes and in our cultures and in our societies and in our workplaces and at the government level. We're not talking about a bubble bath, right? But that seems to where we go, right? So there's this And it's become almost yet another demand of mothers. So it's almost like, okay, you can't be frenzied and exhausted now because you're not taking care of yourself. So yet self-care becomes yet another expectation of the good mother. She cannot be exhausted. She cannot be overwhelmed. She cannot be angry because good mothers take care of themselves and they have to do it themselves. So we got to really think about structural, changes in our society. See this thing as systemic, not as an individual woman not coping. But again, the question is how? How do we get this on the agenda of politicians, researchers, government officials, employers? I don't know. Having this conversation certainly is helping, and all of you as mothers and or supporters of mothers going into your workplaces and so forth and putting it on the agenda certainly helps and is so needed.
No, definitely. And this is a good question, a question from Sush and she's saying she's particularly interested in your ideas around matrifocality. And can you please elaborate on how those narratives can be meaningfully incorporated into works of literature?
Mhm. Good question. Thank you. Yes, I'm borrowing from Marion Johnson's term. I mean, lots of people have written on matrifocality. She's not the only one. I just really like her work. Her book, Strong Mothers, Weak Wives, came out in 1989. So it's quite dated, but it's still a really solid book that I think has not been read as it should be in motherhood studies. And I think, so my work is I mean, I'm a literary theorist. My PhD is in English. I mean, I do other things, but I'm really interested in how we find the mother voice in text. How do we look for it? How do we find it? How do we stay with it? Um, because often the way we're taught to read in our English classes is not encouraging us or showing us how to find and stay with the mother's voice. So that's what, my work is committed to. I've read over 50 novels. I've written on 32 of them in 14 chapters. I've got about another 8 novels, memoirs to read to finish this project up. But I call it the archaeology of maternity, to excavate, to find, to uncover, the real gritty, messy, legitimate, authentic experiences of mothering that are often sanitized, domesticated, through that mask of the good mother from the performance of motherhood, which people are now calling, and I love the term, curated motherhood, how we curate motherhood on social media or in literature, how we make it look perfect and, so without any effort. And I think it's about, diving in and finding the mother in a text and staying with her. And maybe we don't want to because what she's saying is hard, and gut-wrenching, but to stay with her voice and to listen and to expose what mothering really is like when it's experienced, not when it's curated, not when it's mass, not when it's, celebrated on Mother's Day, but, to get down to the raw, gritty details of mothering in fiction. I mean, you can do it lots of other ways. I just happen to be in English, but lots of amazing work is happening in sociology. Sociologists, are pulling mothers aside and saying, asking them questions about. I just met a colleague in Spain and she's doing research. We don't have this in Canada, but in the UK, they have a nurse come visit the mother first week postpartum. And she's really interested. Is this helping or is it hindering? And she's finding maybe it's not helping. You think, well, nurse coming, that's great, isn't it? I mean, but a lot of these mothers feel judged. They're a weekend being a mother and they're worried their house is a mess, they're a mess, their baby's crying, and they feel it's more of an act of surveillance and judgment rather than one of support. So it's interesting. Ask the mothers, are these visits helping you? And if they're not, why not? How can we make them more helpful to you? They're spending a lot of money going into these mothers' homes. And if they're working against the support of mothers, then they got to be done differently. So many sociologists are really, doing really good qualitative research, asking, what about mothers' experiences and then what they need to be a mother and feel more supported in that role. I'm not sure if that answered that question, but it's a very good one.
Oh, it's great. Another question is, Sophia is wondering if there would be any courses you think on learning motherhood or vulnerability of mothers, racialized motherhood. Like, what are the chances? Like, do you know of any courses along those lines? And what are the chances that they'd be mandatory? Um,
Good question. I actually teach at York. I've been teaching this one course for, gosh, 30 years. I mean, it's changed over and over again, obviously. I now teach in a remote format. It's an undergraduate course, second year at York University on mothering and motherhood, and it has 150 students. It is the biggest course in my department, except for the intro course. It's always full. Mainly women take it, some men. But interestingly, the majority of people that take the course are not mothers, right?
Mm,
And they're not even women studies majors. They're just people interested, largely women, but mainly daughters who are interested in the topic of motherhood. So I find that fascinating. I think people are interested in this topic, whether they're mothers or not. I mean, clearly my course speaks that truth. People are taking the course. And they may be mothers, they're not mothers, might be mothers, but they're still interested in the topic. And I think if we created those spaces, whether it's courses or whether it's book clubs or whether it's seminars, I think people, even non-mothers, are interested in learning about motherhood sociologically, historically, thematically, theoretically, psychologically, because we're all born of mothers. And, most of us will become mothers. And even those who don't become mothers, most women do some type of mother work in the professions they have. So yeah, I mean, I also teach a graduate course, as some of my students are with us this afternoon on maternal theory. Again, if I had a wish list, I would have, a course on motherhood studies in every university and every college in the world. That's not going to happen. But I want more courses. And these are courses to talk about motherhood. Be very clear. I'm not talking about courses on how to mother.
of
Those
course.
courses can be very punitive and very judgy. And ideally they wouldn't be, but I know women who've taken them, and it tells you how to be a good mother and to deny that complexity and challenges of motherhood. So this is actually a course to think about motherhood with respect and care from a mother-centered point of view without judgment or surveillance.
So we have had such an amazing and lively talk. So I'm going to end it with one that I really just I thought was great. Um, is how did you come to make this your interest? How was this? How did it start for you? How did you decide this was going to be your focus and your passion and what you were going to dedicate your research and academic
Several
studies
students
to?
who are here know my story, and I've
Oh,
also
great.
written on it. It's the personal is political, as the feminists have always said. Many, many, many years ago, when I was finishing my honors BA here at York University in women's studies, I found myself pregnant, unplanned, and it was like, oh, now what? And I decided to keep that, to keep the baby. That baby will be 41 this summer. And I'm still with that fellow, the father, 44 years later. And it was probably the most radicalizing moment of my life. Obviously, becoming pregnant and a mother was, but for me, I was majoring in women's studies, and I had taken 20 full courses in women's studies, everything from film to health, to public policy to literature, and not one course mentioned motherhood. And I'm like, what? But was fascinating. I didn't notice it until I became pregnant myself. I didn't notice how invisibilized it was, how marginalized it was, and the few times it was mentioned, how disparaged it was. And I thought, how come we're not talking about motherhood in women's studies of all places? How come not? So that became my driving passion. Two more kids later during my MA and then my PhD. I went on to design a course on motherhood, the first in North America, which I've been doing since '92. And then I eventually started an association, a research center on motherhood. And then I started a journal on motherhood. And then I started a press on motherhood. And I've published 30 plus books on motherhood. It's just my passion. We need, to do this research, and this research needs to be supported, and it needs to be read and recognized. Um, and yes, my story began 40 years ago, but I talk to, my students today, and I don't think much has changed. I think, in fact, it's harder to be a mother today in 25 than it would have been when I became a first mother in 1984. I always say that the expectations of mothers, mothers do far more today, or expected to do far more today, with far less support in our current times. So it's just been the passion of my life to take seriously the work of mothering and to do research on that important work.
Well, this has been so amazing and so interesting. And I'm sure there are many people in the audience, as you said, in our group that, as you said, mothers themselves or supporters of mothers who have really appreciated your insights. And so I really want to thank you. And as a mother myself, this has been so interesting and so great. And we really want to thank you for taking the time today, Dr. O'Reilly,
Well,
to
thank
be
you for
with us
having me.
and to share your insights.
It was a delight to share the talk, but even better, was the Q&A, and my cat is now recuperating somewhere.
Wonderful.
So thank you again for being here, and thank you for listening, and thank you for our conversations. Deeply appreciated. And again, in mothering solidarity.
Thank you so much. And for our audience, I just want to let you know a recording of our video will be posted on the YouTube channel, and you can see the link in the chat. We do have one more question for the audience, and it's how would you rate your knowledge of today's topic following the discussion? And while you do that, I'll let you know that we have our Level Up series coming up, who helps new grads navigate life and work after getting their degree. And we're excited to invite you to the Level Up Young Alumni Spring Mixer on Wednesday, May 21st at Greta Bar YYZ in downtown Toronto. Please check our event listings for more information. In addition to that, you can join us on May 28th for our next Scholars Hub session, Where is Democracy Going?, featuring Dennis Pillon, Professor of Political Science at York University in the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies. To register for these events and learn more about our upcoming events, please visit yorku.ca/alumni and friends. Check your inbox for our alumni engagement survey. We're inviting all YorkU alum to participate in and help shape our future by completing the survey. Upon completion, you have a chance to win $250 Any Card gift cards. There'll be 10 in total. Thank you and be well.